2024 was a pretty exciting year for me. I had a show in New York, LA, and Washington, D.C., and by the time those three shows were done, I was tired, mentally tired, kind of hollowed out. And I think a lot of folks that watch this channel probably have some kind of understanding or even history with that. So I thought maybe we'd talk about that a little bit today. So like I mentioned, I was feeling pretty tired mentally, not physically exhausted, mentally exhausted. Just like things were kind of like I didn't have the energy to get started, but once I could get started, things went really well and I was excited to do the work, and I'm still excited to do the work. And the work itself, I still find really exciting. So that wasn't the problem. The problem was kind of like my headspace. I'd felt kind of hollowed out just by doing all the things you do before an exhibit and making yourself kind of open and meeting other people and putting out that energy and receiving it. I was just kind of exhausted. You know, some would call this burnout, but me, I'm not so sure I would call it burnout, at least not in my case. It reminded me of a thing a number of years ago. I read a book by a young writer named Leonard, who's gone on to do a number of books. He wrote a book called The Great American Road Trip Mixtape, something like that. And I enjoyed it. It was his first novel. But it really describes the whole process of him selling everything he owned, moving into his car, and kind of living that way for 6 to 8 months. These days it would be, hashtag van life, right? It was a little bit before that van life period. And at the end of it, he kind of comes out realizing that maybe he didn't need to do all that. Maybe what he really just needed was a vacation. And I thought maybe, sometimes the word vacation is just an expensive way of saying I need to take a little bit of a break. So if you're feeling kind of hollowed out, can you take a little break? A week, 10 days, 2 weeks? Very often, just kind of avoiding work for a little bit like that will get you there. Everyone has like all kinds of strategies they use in the studio to kind of take a break, whether it's cleaning up the studio, which tends to be my favorite way to take a break, rearranging stuff, building a piece of studio furniture, what have you. Everyone has these kind of small things they do to kind of get their head out of whatever work they're in the middle of doing, and those work really well. But there's other things you can do as well. There's always that project that's in the back of your head, like, I'd love to try that one day. Maybe try that on a small scale alongside of the work that you're doing that you're really focused on. Maybe that would give you a bit of a break. But what I will say is if you're in the middle of this area now, don't start that big project that's going to change the world or change your world. Give yourself a week break before you do something like that. But let's say you don't even have time to take a break because you've got, let's say, a show or some kind of exhibit or something going on, or multiple things going on, and your time is just really called for. Probably the best thing you can do is kind of rearrange your schedule in a way that gives you a chance to mentally detach. I live in New York City, so I'll go to galleries or museums maybe for half an afternoon or something like that. Other people might go for a run. I don't run, so I'll go to museums or something like that, or some exercise. But more than anything, something that kind of clears out your head, lets other thoughts come in, lets your head really turn off. And I think that's where physical activity works really well. Bike ride's always a good thing. Like I say, the aforementioned running might work for you. But those are things that you can do that only take a couple hours and let you get back to work. And so maybe that day's a little bit longer in the studio, but you've taken a break in the middle of it. You've literally broken your day up to be able to take that break. And that might be a really good way to go about it. When you've taken that break, what you're doing is you're recharging, right? So even if you've got the one piece that's really super important, or the things you've got to get done, but you do this other little small piece that like you just want to try something out new, while you're doing that, you're still recharging for all the other things you're about to go back to. So it's a great use of your time, and it's a great way to stay in the studio. One thing I learned early on, especially my junior year of college, when we've talked about that at the Corcoran, where everything was about idea generation, we learned that the longer you could literally force yourself to stay in the studio, the longer you were going to stay in the studio, period. And I know that sounds really obvious, right? Like, oh, you mean you stayed in there longer, so you stayed in the studio longer? Yeah, it's exactly that. Because the minute you leave the studio, you're then going to ask yourself to go back to the studio. And if you leave the studio, you're going to clean your brushes, you're going to clean up some things, you're going to maybe take the trash out, whatever that all that stuff entails. You go back in, you're going to have to do all that again, and you're not going to take yourself back in that same day. So the longer you kind of stay in, the better it can be. But remember, we're also talking about kind of working with your burnout a little bit. So take a break in the middle of it. Get out of the studio, knowing that you have to go back because you have to go back to clean your brushes or whatever. And that way, you're able to give yourself a break, clear your head a little bit. Hell, even if it's something as simple as taking yourself out to lunch, just that change of scenery can do it for you. Here's the deal. It's really important to stay refreshed, but also energized to do the work you want to do. There's a book that I read back in the late 90s called The First 20 Million is Always the Hardest. It's by Bronson. It's a great book. They made a movie of it. It's a horrible movie. Don't go see the movie. It's considered the biggest flop of all time, which is kind of impressive when you think about it. But there's a point in the book, and they're talking about, if you can just outwork people, you can be better, right? That's kind of an idea that we all have dealt with. Because like in high school, we worked a little bit harder than everyone else to kind of be the best at what we did. And then in art school or in college, we knew that if we did an all-nighter every once in a while, we could probably get away with it. And then in grad school, you could be up all night just working nonstop. But then what happens is you get into the real world, and everyone has done that system, right? Everyone who's gone through the same process you've gone through has done all this staying up. And what you suddenly realize is you have to both be present and be energized to make the work. So you can't be falling asleep at your desk, right? You've got to be able to be energized and sharp enough to make the work that you really want to make. And I found that to be really, really important. And actually, I've always kind of looked back at that little, probably a throwaway thought process for Bronson, the writer. Anyway, it's the kind of thing that really stuck with me. And I think it's the kind of thing that might be able to stick with you as well. And that's going to do it for me today. Thanks a lot for watching this far down the line. I really appreciate it. If you can, like and subscribe. I continue to hate asking, but truth be told, I kind of love watching the subscriber count roll up. It's kind of cool. Anyway, have a great week. I'll see you next time. Thanks again.